I'm Will Sumsuch. I'm the founder of Colour and Pitch. We have a new single coming on June the 4th called Temple OS by the Self-Help Group, aka Mark Bruce. And there's lots of lovely remixes in the package as well. And so I wanted to get everyone together just to have a chat about the song, because there's actually a great story and, well, an interesting story, quite a tragic story behind the song itself. So first of all, Mark, let's talk about the original song that you wrote. When did you write it, and kind of how did you come across the story of Terry Davis and the Temple OS?
Well, I probably wrote it about 18 months ago. I can't really remember where it came across my desk, so to speak. I see a lot of these it's lots of strange little stories always just catch me. The sort of things that sort of pop up on people's, on sometimes at the bottom of another news article that you're reading and stuff. And I honestly can't really remember where I spotted it. But as soon as I saw it, I was like, right, okay, yeah, that's one for me. A lot of the things that I write about, they kind of, when I see a story or I read something, I just know straight away, yeah, that's one. And I sort of bookmark these things. They just, a certain sort of emotion to a story often sort of appeals, and this certainly fell into that category.
So for those people who aren't aware, to cover the story, Temple OS was an open source operating system that was built by this incredibly talented programmer who was also going through a mental health crisis at the time. He believed he was speaking to God, and he built the third temple, what he believed was a sort of prophesy third temple, online, and was posting, gradually kind of posting about it as he built this online following of kind of people who like to follow eccentrics and curious people, and sadly kind of gradually unraveled as the operating system was rolled out, and was trolled quite viciously, I think, by various people. Ended up homeless, and unfortunately kind of lost his life at the end of the story. So that's the kind of background story in a very sort of a short version thereof, which I wasn't actually aware of when I first heard the song. But obviously when I connected the song with the story, it kind of gave the meaning of the lyrics just such a different dimension, and kind of we actually started talking about the story behind the song as we were working on the remix that I did with Rosko, and it kind of halfway through working on the remix really changed the attitude and the atmosphere in the room, and I think kind of gave rise to the sort of second half of our remix, which is kind of, the idea is kind of dubbing it out and giving a bit of space for reflection and thought about it. But I was wondering, like, what were the aspects of the story, Mark, that kind of grabbed you?
I think it's sort of the tragedy and the sadness of it is always something that kind of like interests me. But it's also a lot. I'm often interested in people's hobbies and some of the crazy things that people do. I've got another song about a guy who dug out his basement and renovated the sort of basement of his house using remote controlled diggers, and just that kind of like, there seems to be no end to people who just do really crazy things, and I just find it fascinating, the things and the hobbies that people have and the things that they do that you just, I mean, I know this was a real talent with programming and stuff, but the lengths that he went to and the extraordinary achievement, I find that kind of thing just quite fascinating really.
There's something really inspiring about it, isn't it? The kind of the idea of folly to that level.
Yeah,
and I think it really comes across in the song. Actually, it feels like a tribute. That's how it felt to me anyway.
Yeah, they tend to be. It's funny because you know, I was slightly worried when we were going to have this conversation. So I'm glad that you've done more research into him than I have, because I tend to pick up these stories and I don't know, I sort of over-aggrandize it, but I sort of briefly inhabit the world in my head, and I'll pick things from the articles that I read, and it's almost like a very, again, that sounds so wanky, but it's almost like a very, very brief love affair with the story, and then it kind of leaves me, and I'm left with a beautiful song. But often 6 months down the line, people will ask me about the song, and I'll be like, yeah, it's about this bloke who did this thing, and I really struggle sometimes for detail, because it's more, once I'm in there, it's about the emotion and the feeling of what it is, and then I'm very briefly away, and that's what I take with me, rather than a great sort of level of detail of, you know, what's gone on.
Yeah, so it's more like the kind of spark that sends you off in a kind of creative direction, and then perhaps thinking too much about the story would almost get in the way of the creative process at that point. It's just a way for me to sort of find, embody something that I can sort of bring some sort of emotion out of, because, you know, I as I've said before, I live a pretty easy life. You know, I'm married, I've got kids and stuff. Nobody wants to hear songs about that. You know, that's dull as dishwater. So just being able to go somewhere else emotionally and be, be in someone else's head, I find it's really, it's quite odd. And I can still sort of singing the songs live and stuff, I can sometimes feel quite sort of emotional for no particular reason, because the songs aren't about me, but because part of my brain has gone sort of into their little world for a little while, I suppose. Yeah, and this story in particular, I think one of the things that I latched onto about it, and it's one of those stories that feels a bit haunting afterwards, because I kind of realised that I felt very emotional about it, but I wasn't even completely clear why it affected me in such a kind of, in such a powerful way. I'm wondering, let's just go around the room. So Michael, aka Grottoes, this is the first production under the new Grottoes alias, but people who've listened to previous releases on Colour and Pitch will know you as Q Burn's Abstract Message, because we did the RMX1 EP a few years ago now. Yes. Did you know the story when I sent you? Did I can't remember whether I explained the full story to you or just sent you the song, or how that came about.
Yeah, you did fill me in on it, which is I mean, like Mark was saying, it's fascinating, and for me more about obsessions, like the obsession angle, like different reasons people get obsessed with certain types of things. I mean, I've had more than my share of obsessions that thankfully haven't ended like the protagonist of this story. But yeah, you did fill me in on the story of the song.
Yeah, and then the version you created, I'd be really interested to know the kind of process, and also the new name. Was that something that you had in mind before you created this remix, or was it something that kind of you went, oh, this is a really different direction musically, so it needs a different kind of different aesthetic attached to it?
Yeah, I've been formulating this project for a few years now, and I've actually started recording slowly a release, an EP under this name, and it's more about, I guess the idea behind it is like an improvisation with texture, and the name is, I came like viciously close to starting an indie rock band in the mid-90s under the name of Grottoes, and I kind of always liked that name and wanted to resurrect it, but then I found out that there are, of course, a number of bands with that same name now, so Grottoes it was. But it's my whole process when I record, especially with this project, is I sort of separate myself from the original song. I mean, I think we've talked about this, Will, in the past, where I often adamantly will not even listen to an original when I do a remix. This I did listen to the original, but I try to get an inspiration from the separated elements of the song on their own, and create what I like to call like a long distance collaboration, where instead of a remix, it's more like I'm collaborating with Mark, where I'm doing something where we're working together. And that's kind of the concept of how I approach a remix and how I've kind of always approached remixes. But this one with Grottoes is more about, it's basically more about, as I said, improvising in texture and just creating textures around the bass element of the song and just seeing where it goes. And that's basically how this song was thought about, or this remix, I mean.
I think it really there's something about, again, there's something haunting about the story, and there's something haunting about the song, because I think your version is instrumental, and it kind of it builds like this big wall of sound, but it does feel like the kind of imprint of the song, and certainly the kind of the mood of the story behind it is it's right there.
Yeah, there's absolutely an imprint. I mean, even though I say I try to separate myself from the original, I never can. Even if I don't listen to the original ahead of time, I'm not separating myself from it, because I am listening to the different parts. But it's this odd, disconnected sort of method to it, where it's almost like ghosts of the original that come out in the remix.
And I'm just interested, which parts were you using? I think it feels like there's some kind of, a lot of the guitar atmospheres are kind of reversed and played within there. And what else did you use?
I think it's just two of the guitar parts, actually. I think that's all I used. I'm not positive because it's been a while, and I kind of erased the process from my head. But I know I built it around two different guitar parts, one on the left, one on the right, and processed completely differently, so they sort of chime together as one part.
Yeah, and it kind of it just swirls around beautifully. It's really I'm really interested to hear the is it an album you're working on for Grottoes? Is that the
we'll see. Probably an EP, really, because I'm working so slowly that I've got some songs that I really want to get out, and I don't know if I want to wait for an album to get them out. So
yeah, I'm really excited to hear more.
Me too.
yeah. So Gavin, when I heard your remix, I was just had a moment of real sadness that the clubs aren't open, because I really felt that kind of, I hate to use the word euphoric because it's generally used about a certain kind of dance music, isn't it? But I really felt that kind of moment. It just the sort of energy and the swell and the breakdown in your remix that was like, for the first time, I think, during lockdown, I wanted to be in a club full of people.
Yeah, I suppose, look, I unashamedly went for a club vibe, but that's just what I'm drawn to. But I was so drawn to the original in the first place anyway, so for me, I could listen to the original all day before I'd listen to mine. So I thought Mark done a really great service to Terry's memory by going with the mood he did go with. So it felt real empathy, in Mark's lyrics. So I picked out a couple of lines out of there that, like, about the temple rising and all that. After watching Terry's story, all that kind of stuff really stuck through about the temple and that random word generator he had going on. And he some of the stuff he was doing was genius, absolutely genius. I'm a big fan of kind of these tech guys from back in the day. I used to do a bit of programming when I was a kid, so I look up to the likes of Steve Wozniak and those guys. But for every Steve Wozniak, there's probably 100 Terrys out there, it's suffering, and he was on that line of genius, and went over that line. So I thought Mark done a really good job of bringing that kind of empathy to his illness, I suppose. So there was a couple of great lines in there I just had to take out and just try and get that emotion through. I know it sounds terribly cheesy, like, but from just making music to make people dance, really, but getting some emotion into the song using Mark's lyrics was so good. you know, was something that I felt right to do, rather than just go, you know, deep house. So it really helped me finish the song. One of the videos I watched in trying to kind of prepare the remix was a video where Terry, he actually made a version of it, like it was a version of it on 2 megabyte file, which is like a Word doc with 2 pages, and he'd done a whole operating system, a bootloader, you know, everything all inside of that. It's beyond genius. So I hope he does get a kind of a more kinder history. You know, I can see some of the comments on YouTube lately are, you know, they do big him up and say, oh, maybe this guy was the best ever programmer, like, you know, he just went off a cliff edge. So yeah, it really helped in the Under remix with that kind of background, and obviously Mark's great original, like, and those guitars and the vocals. So thanks to Mark, really. Like, I just added some beats and some synths, you know.
Yeah. So did you familiarize yourself with the story before you started work, or was that kind of during and after?
It was during and after. Like, obviously you had given me a listen to Mark's original, so I just thought it was a great folk song, you know. I was like, oh, I like that vibe. I'd listened to that kind of music anyway, so I just had it in the background on YouTube for ages. And when I started a remix, I got really stuck, and I couldn't figure out. It's funny, then you told me, could you actually go and look at, did you actually research the guy? I said, what guy? Is this about someone? So when you told me about Terry, I couldn't believe I'd never heard of him before. So it was great to go and actually dig in and watch the documentaries and his own YouTube exploits, like, you know. But yeah, it was fascinating. It was a good journey, and it's a great. It was a unique experience, I think, doing a track and a remix with a story, you know, because it's completely. It's not that it's unheard of. I'm sure there's plenty of producers out there that have a story behind their tracks, and often do, but this is more of a group effort with Mark's original, and it's a great way of doing things and bringing that story to light as well. So maybe it might trigger other people to go and look at Terry's history and Terry's achievements, really.
Yeah, the more I kind of think about the story, it feels like a kind of quite an important parable in a way of, like, kind of, you know, because he had, you know, there was a lot of very, you know, especially in the current climate, there was a lot of problematic things about Terry Davis and his online presence and some of the things he was saying online, and yeah, and it's just an important reminder that we contain multitudes, don't we? That there's, like, you know, there's just so much breadth to a human life, and, you know, that it's so easy and quick to dismiss people, especially in the online space, which is kind of where he resided, and sort of, you know, gradually disappeared in the real world, you know, in a very real sense, didn't he?
Yeah, it's a tragic end, and you're right, it was kind of at the start of the whole mania of social media and YouTube and all that. He was really in early doing live streams and stuff like that, showing off what he was good at, and, you know, obviously the mental illness at the time was getting him a lot of heat and hate, you know, as it would now, and it would be multiple times that now. I fear for what people like Terry are going through right now, you know. So yeah, it's an important message.
So Eric, because the other thing that I should mention that I forgot to mention earlier is that one thing that happened during the pandemic is we kind of, I decided to just start some little label meetups just to kind of see if anyone wanted to drop in and catch up, you know, apart from anything else, for everyone, you know, the artists on the label to meet each other and talk a bit more, but also just to kind of have something to do and check in on each other and stuff. So Mark, the reason why this ended up with, you know, as many remixes as it did was partly because of a kind of chat we had, and I think we'd been talking about the song, and I kind of, you know, in the conversation sent it to Gavin and Eric. So Eric, did we know the story of the song when you started work on it or not? Because obviously I didn't when I first spoke to you about the song.
Yeah, you had mentioned it, and you had mentioned the song and then mentioned the story, and then I went on Wikipedia and kind of just read this whole, you know, the summary of his life and what he did, and the mental illness and things like that. And for me, I thought the song was really, it's got a very interesting paradox of, like, catchy melody and almost like the music's almost happy, but the lyrics are very dark. And I always liked that sort of that dichotomy. So for me, I took you know, the original structure, and I took some of the elements, and I didn't really transform it much, but I kind of just laid like an electronic sheen on it, I guess, with some extra chords and melody and stuff like that. But it's funny, I was telling Will, Mark, that the song is really, really catchy. And I would wake up in the morning, like the night after I was working on it, and it would just be in my head for hours. I don't know why, but there's certain songs that really just, you know, stick in my head for hours on end, for better or worse. And then, but no, I really enjoyed working on it and giving it that spin. And I really enjoyed hearing everybody else's versions, because they're also different. And hearing that interpretation is really interesting to me.
Yeah, that's been quite a strange thing for me to sort of, every time one's dropped into my mailbox, it's been like, whoa, what's this one going to be like? And yeah, it's been just bonkers. I find the whole thing quite bonkers, to be honest with you, because it's just, it's not false modesty, but it is just me and my stupid little songs. And the idea that anybody is actually spending any time listening to them, apart from my children and my wife, is quite bizarre to me. I can't quite compute sometimes when things like this happen. It's you know, it's like Will with the remix you did, and that ended up on Radio 6. That was just completely nuts, you know, to me. I think that day I was down in the studio and I came back in and my telephone had about 7 or 8 messages saying, really loved your song on Radio 6. And I was thinking, fucking song on Radio 6. And yeah.
Well, thanks so much for trusting me with the, you know, with the first, because obviously we met at one of your gigs through Tim, your former percussionist, and you know, you trusted me with the remix, and then obviously like with this one there was much more trust, because basically I kind of went, can I go and get a load of people to remix this, a load of people you don't know? So yeah, seriously, thank you for trusting me to do that.
Yeah, what's not to love though? It's just, you know, it's just nice to put something out and just let stuff come back. For me, it's a no-brainer. You know, I know that you know good people, and it's invariably going to sound good. And yeah, thank you.
So Temple OS by the Self-Help Group, remixed by Grottoes, Gavin, Boyce, Eric Shands, and Rosko and Sumsuch, is out on June the 4th, and it will be out on all digital platforms then.